You're listening to On Shifting Ground. I'm Ray Suarez. The recent spate of violence in Sub-Saharan Africa is centuries in the making. Finding solutions isn't easy. Last November, at the 2023 Global Philanthropy Forum, we assembled leaders from across the globe to have difficult conversations about getting to work on that challenge. When we talk about lifting the world out of poverty, Africa is often at the center of any meaningful discussion. But saying we simply need to, quote, develop the global south feels a little reductive. One of the GPF conference speakers has worked on the African continent for decades. He sees its potential in a different light. Abraham Leno is executive director of the Eastern Congo Initiative. As a humanitarian leader, Leno has led relief and development efforts across Africa and is now in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He's based in the city of Bukavu and joins me now from Washington, D.C. Abraham Leno, welcome to On Shifting Ground.
Thank you very much, Ray. It's good to be here.
Eastern Congo has been, in the recent past, a place where not only Congo's problems, but the problems of neighboring countries intrude and make things difficult on the ground. Is there violence right now in Eastern Congo? Does it make things dangerous for the people working with ECI?
What you have alluded to is quite correct, and we know it's not just in recent, but it's been in the history, that for obvious reasons, whether it is Congo's riches, Congo's geographic location, it as a country that is neighboring to 9 other nations around Africa, it's like the heart of Africa. And because of that influence, whether historically for slave trade and transits, to whatever is happening now, the energy transition, all of those issues have contributed to the players or the number of people that operate in or that are interested in Congo and whatever resources it has to offer. And that also includes its neighbors. The current situation in Congo is that there is conflict in eastern part of Congo, in places around Goma. But it's not just within Goma, it's also in the neighboring villages in North and South Kivu. There's a lot of violence. There are armed groups that are terrorizing women, children, and men and killing. And there are places where we work directly. One of the locations where we have a healthcare facility as well as a water service provision known as Minova. Just as recent as last week, there were bombs that were falling in there. It's been quite insecure for my team. I have had people, including staff members, that have been terrorized by this, and some people have suffered some physical and sexual violence through this conflict as well.
Those names, Kivu, Goma, Bukavu, they may jump out at people. They may remember those names from the time when the Interahamwe, an army from over the border in Rwanda, poured into Eastern Congo and sought refuge there. Are the problems of Rwanda, Burundi, and other countries still visiting themselves on Congo?
You quite know very well the landscape is that most of these nations are landlocked. So if you ship in anything, you have to go from one country to the other to get into another. And so there is always a room for negotiation, a room for trade, a room for sharing resources, and sometimes that also brings tensions and conflict. And so these are the situations that we have seen, particularly without much details within the Rwanda and Congo conflict. We all know since the genocide, Rwanda has accused the Congo of harboring suspected or alleged perpetrators of genocide. And so they have accused that Congo harboring those is like harboring our enemy, and we're going to chase our enemy wherever they are. So that's their justification in part for what is happening in the Congo. There are other obvious reasons why, some people have also alleged that the resources that I mentioned, whether it is the natural resources or intellectual, human resources, capital that is being harnessed in those communities, that also is making the players or the influence of these other nations, whether it's Burundi, Uganda, and the Rwanda, play a huge part into what is happening in the Congo.
Does Kinshasa feel really far away? Does it feel involved in your problems and your challenges when you're trying to get things done in Eastern Congo?
Yes, in terms of also the distance, not just in the population, but it's over 2,000 miles between some of the extreme areas in the east to Kinshasa, which is the capital. There is also the distance in terms of leadership and where the political seats are. The presidency is in Kinshasa, and you have local chiefs, tribal chiefs, or regional provincial leaders in the provinces. There is infrastructure challenges, communication. So all of these issues, yes, have created a distance between Kinshasa and what tends to happen in the provinces. And that is visible even in our own activities, that if you want to negotiate something that needs approval and the person that has the approval sits in Kinshasa, you have to travel. And sometimes it's a whole day loss if you travel in country and you manage to find a flight. Otherwise, you have to take maybe a regional flight that takes you to Ethiopia, Kenya, and back into Congo just to have access. These are the challenges that we face logistically as we try to implement activities.
I wonder, as far away as Kinshasa can seem, also because often the government is weak, so its authority doesn't even run in Eastern Congo, whether for all the distance of Kinshasa, New York, where the United Nations is, seems even further away. Brussels, the capital of the former colonial power, but also the capital of the European Union, seems even further away. Have you been left on your own in trying to solve the problems, address some of the problems of a very troubled part of the world?
The answer is yes. Um, I have to say, you've named many places that seem far away, but right now, for the Congolese person, I just came from Congo on Tuesday. And for the Congolese person, over the 12 years that I have lived there and I've lived and seen atrocities and seen what is happening, it almost feels like the world is too far away. We've seen the responses that we get from other conflicts. We're not comparing situations, but lives all around the world, children and suffering. We should be looking at what is also happening in the Congo and put that on the same level. And we have seen that it's almost complete neglect. I'm so grateful to have even this opportunity with you, Ray, to talk about this, to shine a light on what is happening in the Congo, because the Congolese people, they deserve better. They deserve better for what their contribution to the world has been and what their contribution to the world is ever going to be. This is a country with a very youthful population that is going to be a workforce for African employment. You know, there is enough intellectual capacity in Congo that we don't often get to talk about. There is the mineral wealth. There is everything that we can bring in, and Congo will be right there in its importance to the world. But right now, it feels like the world is too far away. Yes, New York is really far away, but it is the world that feels so far away.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the population dimension because a lot of people don't realize that with so many people in the wealthy world, like me with gray hair, the working age population, the prime age working population of the middle of this century is going to be in Sub-Saharan Africa. It's going to be the place on the planet where there are more prime age, working age people than any other place, more than Asia, more than Latin America, and certainly more than North America, where we are in the midst of a gray tidal wave, and there's a big generation of older Americans now. This can be a resource, but it can also be a challenge that, if not handled well, can be very dangerous because it also means the age at which people will be frustrated, disappointment sets in, and they can be recruited as soldiers. A rifle can be put in their hands. And the kind of instability that we've seen in the Great Lakes region in Africa can just go on and on through the rest of the century. Is it important to put these coming generations of young people to work?
It is. And the issues that you have raised, I'll share a little bit of my background. I grew up as, one of those young people in Africa. I had my life with my family. And at age 16, there was a war in my country, Sierra Leone. And that war sent me into refuge for 11 years with my family in Guinea, where I learned French. I was selling fuel in bottles on the streets in Conakry, in Guinea, until I managed to go back to school through the kindness and generosity of somebody who paid for my education that I've never met. And here I am today. I reflect on this because fast forward many years, the Congolese youth that we are talking today that are neglected, that are abandoned, that are not provided such opportunities that we are talking about, those are me a couple of years back. And I know the things that went through my mind when I went through the war and was left alone. I know the tendencies for becoming something that I may never have wished or that never want to talk about, So the more we ignore the plight of these young people, the more we should expect our world to grow in instability. And it's not just going to end in the locations where these people were born. We're trying to solve migration issues. We're trying to solve unemployment issues. We're trying to solve diseases. But once you have migration, people leaving, running because there are no opportunities or because there are wars in their locations, I'm not saying refugees are going out with diseases, but I'm saying if we want to solve global issues, we also have to look at them through a local lens, through a regional lens, through the plight of these different people groups that we tend to ignore. And the young people in Congo deserve much more than they are getting today from the world.
In the post-colonial period, Africa has been a tremendous recipient of foreign aid and foreign investment. And today, many of the countries that have been big recipients are still quite poor, quite badly run, and it's become very stylish in the donor world to denigrate aid. The book by Dambisa Moyo talking about how you should stop giving foreign aid, that was very popular in a lot of Western capitals. I wonder if that makes your job harder and what you have to give as part of the value proposition to help the Eastern Congo Initiative continue to raise funds and continue to do the kind of work you're trying to do.
Here, I like to coin a phrase that one of my board members often, says in our meetings. He said, "We do not have a donor fatigue. We actually have a compassion fatigue." And what has brought about the compassion fatigue is also what you have highlighted is, yes, the African continent and Sub-Saharan Africa has been a huge recipient of aid, but that's just one part of the story. How has that aid been perpetrated in those societies is another part of the story. Who has benefited from that aid package is another part of the story. And sometimes we look at it at one-sided as being given. There is the fact that a lot of that aid is prescribed aid. Prescribed in the sense that when you've been given a donation, but the donation is serving just the needs of the person that gave it, then there's not much that aid is going to do for you. It's going to help you maybe satisfy the conditions that you need to meet to continue receiving it, but it's not answered what your needs were or what your priorities were. I once had a conversation recently with our partner, Nespresso, and one of the things that connected the CEO and myself, he asked me, tell me something about Africa that may be shocking. And I said, I sit as an African and I speak for young people with $1 million ideas, but when I go ask for funding, I get 10,000. So try to reconcile that. All right. So we're receiving aid, but also it's not commensurate to the ideas and the visions that we have to change the continent. And so that also needs to be resolved in terms of how much equity, how much responsibility, how much opportunity are we providing with the aid that is coming. So the way that I look at it is we've been talking a lot around localization. USAID mission or vision through the current leadership is to emphasize local ownership, local structures. And I'm not just looking at this as a nationalistic agenda. I am really saying if that is what the vision is, let's walk the talk or let's talk the walk, right? And get to the nitty-gritty of it. What are the channels that we're using for leadership? How are we empowering leadership to be able to make the decisions around how aid is distributed, but how aid is administered and how aid is implemented in local communities? Let's walk the talk in ways that we strengthen local capacity. And let's walk the talk in, I think that a lot of African economies are really not seeking aid. What we're really seeking is partnership. All right. But we're not getting partnership. So the default form is to tend to stretch the hands and say, okay, give me. To be honest, I have ideas, and I know that a lot of people will have ideas to implement businesses, to grow businesses, whether it's in startup businesses, whether it's in the technology space, is in agriculture, is in manufacturing. There are tons and tons of businesses, but access to capital is quite difficult. We're also not helping to change policy. I mean, if we have used our aid, the aid that we bring into these nations to help to change policy so that it becomes business friendly. Let's build business friendly environments within those economies. Then we don't have to provide aid. We can form a partnership, and who knows, royalties might grow out of those endowments. And then these businesses that are created can become the sustainers or the people that sustain the development of their own nations. So I think it is looking at that package itself of how aid has gone into nations to solve the problem of how do we stop perpetual aid. And many people are on that line as I sit. And ECI, the work that we do through our collaborative grant making is really start from the get-go. When we go into a community, we're not going with imposed ideas. We're saying what works, what are the opportunities, and the common way we put this is, let's help Congo solve the problems that Congo doesn't solve for itself.
But even if your approach and the design that you described, I think it's right what's required to address the problems of a region of an enormous country. But I wonder if you have to pay for the sins of others, whether the perception of a chronic corruption, the perception of a bottomless pit, the perception of a hopeless Africa where all the news is bad. It's just a litany of bad news that comes from different parts of the continent, but there's so little fine-grained knowledge that understands what the difference is between Cameroon and Mozambique and Congo, that you have to fight the gravity that those put on you when you're trying to soar, when you're trying to get your aircraft off the ground. You have all the added weight of all these other things going on where you have to not only sell yourself and your ideas, but also dispel the notion that this money is going to be wasted.
It feels like that in many ways. And I'll narrow it down to even myself. I see it as an African, and I have a proven career, a proven experience in many international institutions for over 22 years. But trust me, even when I go ask for funds, in many places, I'm not given the opportunity. When I go talk about issues in Africa, the voices of others tend to be heard much more than mine. So I'm bringing it down. It's not just what I experience, but extrapolate that to nations and to countries. Yes, it feels like that in Congo. Part of it, we have to be frank and say yes. We have had some very disappointing leadership systems in some of our countries in Africa. Part of that, you have also touched on the systems, whether it is failed leadership, whether it is the failed economies, whether it is selfish ambitions, and all the instability. And yeah, it feels like a bottomless pit. But I look at this as an opportunity for us to also change that narrative. We have long lived that narrative, and what has it given us? It's given us the same results. I think that it is time for us to look and try to change that narrative as opposed to fostering that narrative. And these are the opportunities. This is my first interview in 22 years as a leader with someone like you on a station that, who knows, millions of people will get to hear this. Okay, I am able to tell the story in my own voice. I think given the opportunity for Africans, good examples, most of the time, even in media, the reason I say we should change the narrative or we should work on changing that is most times we tend to give more room to the negative to be aired and less room to the positive to be spoken about. We have opportunities now to shed light on what are the young people doing to change their communities. We have a lot of those stories. We have an opportunity to talk about leaders that are coming up and that are showing good progress and opportunity, bringing opportunity to Africans and asking the questions that need to be asked, whether they are related to slave trade, whether they are related to colonization, whether they are related to the inequity that we see within global politics. We need to give those the opportunity to be able to tell their story as much as there is also the room that has been given to bring out all what is negative and why we should not invest in Africa.
Well, let's make the most of this opportunity then. Give us some examples of ECI work that shows the possibility of these collaborations, these partnerships, these investments that improve the lives of people in Eastern Congo.
All right. Right now, we have two sets of activities that we do. One is collaborative grant making, and it's basically giving opportunity to young people, women, girls that want to start businesses. And we provide them startup grants as well as incubation grants to be able to start and run those businesses. They formalize themselves. We advocate with their local governments to allow them, give them favorable conditions to start businesses, allow opportunities for export. Bring in within those spaces for those who are at the level of export, bringing in partners that we have worked with over the years, whether it is the Starbucks, whether it's the Nespressos, whether it is the Mortensen Family Foundation. There are lots of people that have come into our space that are helping us accelerate and expand those opportunities that we have seen within Congo. So that's one area of the work. Right now, there are over 20,000 women that we have worked with in the coffee sector. And actually, a lot of people may not know, but Theo Chocolate, that has a distribution network in the United States and Canada, sources its cocoa beans from the Congo. And they've been doing this along with us for so many years. But most times, those things don't get aired out. Nobody knows about that. And so these are some of the opportunities that we have. We have a social enterprise model that we created that I mentioned. It's called Asili. We work with the State Department that provided capital for startup. And then we've run that for the past 10 years, providing water and healthcare within Congolese communities. I went there with a backpack on my back and started that with $40,000. And today we are touching over 200,000 people every single day providing water. We sell that water at affordable prices. It's 20 liters for 0.01 cent of a dollar, so that we can allow that to grow sustainably. But these are the kind of opportunities that we have. And sometimes people ask, why are you making the poor people pay? And I just tell everybody, there is no price for dignity. The poor people want their dignity back. They want to say they are contributing to their own development. And we should not take that away from them under the disguise of perpetual aid.
And sustainability is supported by some revenue If you don't take money, you'd have to always continue to ask for donors to keep the thing going.
Yeah. And that's why we are breaking that cycle, because now the grants that we support and co-locate them around these businesses are employment providers. They are, someone that received, let's say, $3,000 to $5,000 to start a small table business. They're not going to tell me I can pay 0.01 cents of a dollar for 20 liters of water for my family. But it takes a pioneering work. It takes resilience, like staying longer. It's not just this band-aid. Like I come in and want to do 3 months thing and write a report and say, I have done this. I have told you I've lived in Congo for 12 years. I'm not a Congolese and I'm not done yet. And that's the kind of mentality that we need to have in terms of what we want to do if we want to change communities.
Abraham Leno is the executive director of the Eastern Congo Initiative. He joined me from Washington, D.C. Abraham, a great pleasure to talk to you.
Great pleasure to talk to you, Ray. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to On Shifting Ground, produced in partnership with KQED, with funding from listeners like you. Today's episode was produced by Elise Manukian and our sister team at the Global Philanthropy Forum. It was mixed and mastered by Matteo Schimpf. Additional production and engineering were provided by Rob Spate. KQED's Jim Bennett is our technical supervisor. Jared Sport is our executive producer. Philip Yun is co-CEO of Commonwealth Club World Affairs. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ray Suarez. Thanks for listening.